Welcome to another Planet 6 Parts Tips video. Today's video, true top dead center. Version 2. I say version 2 because last night I made a version 1, I finished it, I uploaded it, and then first thing this morning I realized I left something out. So I have to take it down and do it. So if you've seen it, you'll see the difference. If not, this is version 1 to you. Okay, the true top dead center. So this is a two-part video. Part 1 I'm going to explain what the true top dead center is and the way I go about doing it. And I say that because there's a lot of videos out there that show you how to obtain the true top dead center, and they're great videos. By all means, watch them. So like I said before, Rusty Beauties makes some amazing videos and a lot of stuff, highly recommended. But I just have my way of doing it, and when I look at the majority of way how people get the true top dead center, to me I see the possibilities of some discrepancies. There's a possibility that you could end up with the wrong number. So this video is to explain why I do it this way and why you could get the wrong number. It doesn't mean you have to do it this way, but just for the sake of that, there is the possibility. So let's go explain this. Here is my crappy little drawing, my artist's impression. True top dead center. So if you're using your standard micro gauge, as the piston travels up to the top, it's going to get a reading. Eventually it will get to the top, it will stop reading. Then it's going to plateau out, or go across the crown, the crests, whatever you want to call it, until it starts going back down again and it makes a second reading. So the point where it stops reading, the point where it does, that's your top dead center. However, you want ideally true top dead center. That is the point right in the middle. So how do you obtain that? As I said, a lot of videos will tell you to do it pretty much this way. Again, it does work. I know for a fact it does work. However, to me, there's the possibility that you can get a round number and probably not even realize it. So here's a piston. Piston will come up and people will have a plate and they'll have a nut and bolt used as a bump stop to stop the piston in the exact same spot, going both directions. And when it comes up, you stop it, take a reading with our gauge. And what I left out in version 1 is that this gauge actually goes on because people use the camshaft to make the reading. I had the gauge pointed over the bump stop. I left out the camshaft part there. So when it comes up and the lifters go up, you take the reading off that. It hits it, you take one reading, you get it here, go the other way, get the next reading, get it here. Basically take the two numbers, add them together, so divided by 2, and then you end up whatever's in the middle, that's their actually true top dead center. So that'd be somewhere on the degree wheel, that'd be another spot on the degree wheel, add them all together, divided by 2, and then that's exactly in between points, and that's how you'll get that. Like I said, does it work? Absolutely. But here's my issues with it. One is that the bottom of the bolt. So I have a list here of possibility things that may arise an issue in getting an actual 100% perfect number. The bottom of the bolt. So I have a bolt in my hand. You use this standard bolt. People use this as a bump stop. So they'll screw it into a hole or whatever, whether they thread a plate or just a nut. The thing is though, like if you look at the end of it, it's pretty decent finish at the end, but they're not always great because there is a thread. So people like to round it off just to make sure there's no sharp edges and all that. But the thing about that is though, how good of a finish can you get? How good of a, if you round it off, how perfect can you get that? I'm telling you now, it's not going to be perfect. I know I certainly couldn't do it. And that's where my first part of the discrepancy may come in, because every time the piston comes up and touches off it, what if this slightly moves? What if it's since it's imperfect, because again, unless it's machined, it's going to be off. What if it's imperfect and that every time you come up you touch the slightest little spot on it differently? Well then that allows maybe a little bit more travel on the piston and you may end up with a different reading by 1/1000 of an inch. Now it's highly unlikely, but depending how you round it off, there's that possibility. How flush can you? Even if you had a dead flat, again it's a sharp edge, people like to do it so you don't cause any damage to the head, but there's that possibility. So how you round off your bump stop can determine if you may end up getting 2 different readings every time you do, or every time you bump off it, it touches a different spot. I'm just saying there's always that possibility. So that's the first possibility of where you may get an issue. Most likely, highly unlikely, but there's a possibility. The next one is the threads. Now, again, going back to our bolt and even the nut, both have threads. In order to be able to screw it on, as you know, there has to be wiggle room. There has to be a room that can move. Even if we don't notice it, there has to be play. So if you have your nut and bolts, if you have to screw it in, you just screw it in and it's just sitting there. When you bump off it, is there a possibility that this nut can actually still move because it's going between the play between the threads? Yeah, it can. Unless it's like really, really tight and you've already condensed that play. But there's still a possibility. Again, it depends how tight you put it or how it's done. Maybe the nut will move. And again, if it can move, there's always the possibility it can wobble. Always just the possibility, because maybe the hole is slightly bigger. I'm not saying that it can, but again, if there's movement in here already, there's room for error. If there's room for error, there's that possibility that you could end up with a discrepancy. And again, it could be just 1/1000th of an inch, or just past the line, and you'll go to the next number when it's the one before that. So again, it may end up giving you a little wrong number. Still keeping with the nut part of it, is the nut and plate. So again, how do you fix the nut to the plate? Is it tack welded? Is it just pressing against it? Is there a rubber washer on it? Is the plate itself perfectly smooth? That's the thing. How you even put the plate on? Like if you're using the original holes in this to put it on, like, and you put washers under it, is one washer thicker than another? Because they're not exactly ideally perfectly machined to the exact same. I can guarantee if you measured each washer, there's probably a little tiny indiscrepancy, you know? But again, how flat is it? Did you tighten one more than the other and now there's a little slight bow in it? You just don't know. And if there's a little bow, there's a possibility of movement. There's a possibility of movement. There's a possibility of getting being off by even 1/1000th of a degree. So your plate can say a lot. Maybe there's rust on it. Maybe it's not exactly the straightest plate. Maybe it's just a weak metal or a thin metal, and it actually does flex. So if you bump off it too much, it may push it a bit. And if it pushes a bit, the bump stop could move a bit more. And if it moves a bit more, then you are going to get a different reading. So that's the nut and plate. The other one is the bolt head. So depending on what you use, like I said, most people just use something, cut the top off, and you basically have a bar sticking down onto the camshaft into one of the followers. But whether it's that or the actual using a bolt head, is that how good of a finish is this? How smooth of a finish? This, as you can see, is a brand new bolt. It has 3 little lines on it. So like if I'm reading this and it touches off one of those little lines, because they sit up, but then that can move it. It can push it, it can move it, it can make the gauge move a tiny bit more, and now you can end up with a discrepancy on it. Maybe there's a little indent on it or a depression on it, and again, it can do the exact same thing. If you use something like this and you cut the top off, again, can you guarantee it's absolutely smooth? It could be at a slight angle, which means any pressure, it will always go down and go to the weakest point. So therefore, if it's not exactly 90 degrees, it can possibly push it. It only takes the tiniest minuscule to move to end up by being off by even 1/1000th of an inch. And again, that's what I refer to as that. I'm not saying it can or will, but there's always the possibility that what you use to actually take the reading off, if it's not a perfectly smooth surface, that you may end up getting inaccurate readings. The next one is the gauge itself. So the gauge itself, the gauge most people use the exact same as this. This is a standard Princess Auto job. But this is what I'm referring to as the very end of this gauge is very sensitive. It's like a ballpoint pen. It's it's slim enough. It's very sensitive. So if it went over even a piece of shrapnel, like in the way of dust, even that could even be enough to slightly move it to make the gauge move. Again, if the surface is not perfectly smooth and there is any ridges, it can do it. So it's so sensitive that you have to have a pretty good surface to have it perfect. Now I'm saying that probably what you use is pretty good, and I'm not saying that it has to be machined around like that, but there's that possibility. There's a possibility that the surface you're using is not, it's like trying to use your hand. Any lump will cause it to wobble forward or backwards, and that could be enough to send the gauge and actually end up looking at the wrong number or being 1/1000th degree off. So again, it's just another possibility, that's all. The last one here is your eyes. So this is a huge one actually, believe it or not. How do we see? How do we read a gauge? Do we look at the exact same point every single time when we read this thing? I can guarantee not. As much as we think we are, I can guarantee we're not. Because I said you don't do it. How much do we struggle when we try to put the gauges in the car? No, no, no. Drives us nuts because every time we look at it, no, it's crooked, because probably our heads are crooked. The same thing will apply to this. So this is a simple coat hanger I use to make for the pointer. But a lot of people will use the same sort of thing, or a piece of wire. Things so like how thick is that wire? Yeah, this is a coat hanger. It's pretty thick. This is probably at least 1.5 degrees wide. So if I have this down and it's covering one of the markers and it stops, and I say, for example, somebody will look at it and go, what's that? And I look at it and go, oh, that's 10 degrees after top dead center. And somebody else will look and go, no, it's 9. No, I think it's 8. Because we're looking at it different, especially if we block any of the degree markers. Because now, since we can't see it, we can't see where it is, because it's basically hiding behind us. So like, there's our bolt, there's our pencil. Like, how far to one side is it really? It's hard to tell. So we move our head to try judge. And if you're moving your head, it's that possibility of discrepancy, because now you're moving to see, and now it's a guessing game. You can go either way. How can we eliminate that? How can we eliminate all of these? How can we eliminate all of these possibilities of maybe getting an inaccurate reading? Well, this is why I have this system here. So this is the system I use, and I'm going to explain why I do that and how is a good way to eliminate all these. The best way to eliminate all them possible discrepancy is to eliminate them completely. So as you can see, I don't have a bump stop, I don't have a plate, I don't have anything. I'm actually going directly to the piston. How do I do that? I use a push rod. So the reason why I use a push rod is this is a machined surface. It's machined, it's smooth, it should be perfect, providing it hasn't been dropped or it's a bad one. But it should be pretty much a perfect smooth finish. Granted, this is a brand new piston head, so now I have a perfectly smooth reader with a perfectly smooth surface. That's what you want. What I've done is I've literally turned it upside down, I've cut it, I've grinded down a little notch in it and allowed me to slip I grinded a notch in the actual gauge and allowed me to slip it in by grinding it down and just tack welded it. So now there's no possible way of discrepancy. There's nothing, no other moving part, there's nothing else in between where I can technically go wrong. It's directly from the piston directly to the gauge. Nothing else in between. There is nothing else in between that I'm relying on for it to pass through. So to me, this is going to be a lot more true than, I'm not saying the bump stop doesn't work, but like I said, there's always the possibility if it's not perfect every single time, well then you could get it wrong. So this is pretty much eliminating that possibility. So in part 2, I'm actually going to run the system. I'm going to show you how I'm actually going to do it. But one of the other most important things, if you notice upon it, is ice. It doesn't seem that important, but it actually is. It's probably one of the most important things, because the equipment is the equipment, but how we read it or how we see it can always be different. And that's what I was saying, is that we can always, somebody else will always see something different. So how do we eliminate that? How do we be able to see the exact same thing every single time identically? It's actually very easy. On this here, what I've done is that I've basically squared it off using a vise to make it as square as I can. Here's the 3 important keys to this. 1, what I've done is I've sharpened the end of it, so it's basically like a pencil. I've made it to a point and not a flat surface. So I've made it to basically as accurate as I can by sharpening it down. Number 2 is this is above the lines. It's not blocking any of the markings, it's actually above it. I got it as close as I can to it without physically blocking it, so I know it's sitting directly on top. It makes a more accurate point of where we're going. Even if it's in between a degree, it's a more accurate point than having a block in it where I have to move my head to see. But we also want to avoid moving our heads to begin with. So if it's above it, well, you don't have that issue to begin with. The last one is, how do we always look at it the exact same way? What we're going to do is we're going to create a line of sight. A line of sight is finding a reference point behind. So for me, for this one, when I put it on, I realized that the edge of this hole is pretty straight with it. Now, again, straight is only as straight as I think of how I'm looking. You can only feel that something's straight if you have 2 reference points. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create 2 reference points. And the dial is not a reference point. It's a moving object. It is not a reference point. You need 2 static pieces to make the reference point. So when I look at this now, I look at the very tip and I'll look and I'll line it up at the very edge of this hole, and I know I have my line of sight. Whatever number is directly or marking is directly below that point, that's what I'm going to go by. And I'll always go by that, and it's going to be true. It's going to be the same all the time. Even if I look at it funny and I'm looking at a slight angle across and I'm looking at the wrong line, if I constantly do it all the time, if I pick the wrong one, if I'm 1 degree off from start to finish, it's actually correct, if that makes any sense. So if you're always wrong, you're right. If you're always right, you're right. I know, confusing, isn't it? The point is, though, if you always look at the exact same spot, that's your point of reference. You will use that point of reference for everything. So if you're looking at a crooked, that crookedness is the true top dead center. Well, then everything else you do is based off that. It's still a true top dead center in reality. If you have a bigger degree wheel, or if you have it up on this, or if you have it up here, or you put it on this side, wherever you want to put it, it's your own choice. Find a reference point behind. Do this, have it above the wheel, as close as you can to the wheel, but above the markings. So above the markings, make a point, and then find a reference point. If you don't have a reference point, and it could be anything, as long as it's static, it could be the edge of a bolt. Yeah, you might put a bit of Tr6 and say, hey, this is the point here, so I don't get mixed up which one I'm actually looking at. If you don't have one, don't use anything that moves, make one. Like maybe there's a scratch in the plate, maybe you put a tiny bit of Tr6 and just put a dot, maybe put a bit of tape, or masking tape, and put another dot or a line, something to give you a reference point that will not move from point to point, and then that's your line of sight, and you stick with that, and I can guarantee you will get the perfect reading every single time. Every single time. So putting this all together, is this system better than the way most people do it? No, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that these are possibilities of discrepancies, just possibilities. They may not. Hopefully not. It's not the purpose of this data. But if we can eliminate these possibilities, we can eliminate the possibilities of getting it wrong or getting the wrong reading, especially even just simply how we look at it. We can have the best equipment, but if we can't look at it correctly, well then you never know. And that's the reason for this. So I'm hoping this video is helpful. If you like it, you'll join me in part 2, and you'll see me. We're actually going to go through this, and we're going to actually run the numbers and get the true top dead center. And yeah, like I said, this is not in any way, shape or form trying to say that any other way, any other person's way of doing it, any other video out there of getting the true top dead center, that's wrong and this is right. It's not that at all. The point is, regardless whose video you look at, whether it's this one or somebody else's, that you get the result you want, which is a true top dead center. And that's the meaning for it. This is just my way of doing it. This is me explaining why I think that these run the possibility. The less parts you have in it, the less moving parts, the less that can or possibly could go wrong. And that's the purpose of this. So, if you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in part 2.